On the line with us is Ben Ehrenreich, the journalist and contributor to The Nation magazine, author of The Way to the Spring, based on reporting from the West Bank, and a forthcoming book coming out early next year, Desert Notebooks, a roadmap for the end of time. BenEhrenreich.net is his website, and Ben Ehrenreich is his Twitter handle. Ben, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Tom. It's great to be here.
So you're writing about PG&E and power belonging in the hands of the people, essentially. If we only have one power line coming into our house, that's a natural monopoly, and therefore that should not be in the hands of private for-profit corporations because it's just ripe for exploitation, among other things. Do I have that right?
That sounds about right. Yeah. I mean, I think this has been very clear for a very long time, and anyone who remembers, say, the name Erin Brockovich will probably have some idea why, or who remembers the 2010 pipeline explosion in San Bruno, California, which killed 8 people and wiped out almost 30 homes. But I think the climate crisis has made it absolutely clear that having a private entity, which is beholden only to its investors, who are not people who necessarily live in California or care at all about people who live in California, but having them control essential public resources is a recipe for catastrophe. And that catastrophe isn't something that we have to guess at anymore. Right. Catastrophe is something we're living.
Yeah, it's not an abstraction. It's very real. You mentioned Erin Brockovich. I remember, this was like the 80s or 90s, wasn't it? When she outed some pollution crisis. Am I remembering correctly? I mean,
this was
refresh my memory, please.
She was a humble law clerk in the small town of Hinckley, California, a small town in the Mojave Desert, and started noticing that a lot of her neighbors were coming down with cancer. And she did some research and found out that PG&E had for years in the 1950s and 60s been dumping hexagonal chromium, wastewater laced with chromium-6 in unlined pools outside of Hinckley. And if you dump water in unlined pools, it seeps into the water system and into the aquifer. Right. So they had contaminated. It's a small desert town. They probably didn't think twice about it. And it took people's lives. It destroyed people's lives. And that contamination, this is that's well known. Erin Brockovich was played by Julia Roberts.
That's right.
And this was a big movie. All of America got to hear about this one, and they still haven't cleaned it up. There's still
there's still hexavalent chromium in the water in Hinckley.
Yeah, if you pour water, if you pour wastewater into the water table, it spreads.
Yeah,
you get a plume that spreads for miles and miles.
Yeah.
I found a piece. I think it was in Vice that I linked to in the Nation article that was published a couple of years ago. That it's still a mess.
Still there. We're talking with Ben Ehrenreich, who writes for The Nation magazine, among other things. He's got a new book that'll be out early next year, Desert Notebooks, a roadmap for the end of time. Ben, I remember Enron. I remember when when all those audio tapes came out, and I think some of them came out from the Portland, Oregon office, in fact, which is where I am, of Enron, where they were talking about shutting down power. Shut down grandma. Shutting off power to people in California in order to create a perception of an electrical shortage crisis. That I think this might have been summer, and they might have been trying to blame it on air conditioners or something. But the reality is that all they were trying to do was set up an excuse for an increase in rates. and which they succeeded in doing. But and also they wanted to hurt Gray Davis, who was the Democratic governor, because he wanted to regulate them, and they wanted to replace him with a Republican, which is exactly what happened. This took down Gray Davis, and you ended up with,
they recalled him and replaced him with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you know, a recall that was heavily funded in part by Enron, and then you ended up with Arnold Schwarzenegger. But then Enron imploded. How much of, you said PG&E was, had been poisoning people since the 50s in California. Was PG&E, what was the relationship between PG&E and Enron, and how interconnected were Enron and PG&E in the California power systems?
Oh God, I write about climate. I'm hardly an expert on
Okay, so that's not your
on
area.
utility politics.
Okay.
But I'll tell you, I do remember in those years I was living in Los Angeles and being up in San Francisco at the height of that, and being it was a real crisis. They were turning out the lights all over the state. You'd be in downtown San Francisco, and the lights were off in most of the government buildings. There was a kind of semi-apocalyptic feel to it. And then you go back to Los Angeles, and everything was fine. We didn't have any brownouts, we didn't have any blackouts, we didn't have our rates were completely unaffected as the rest of the state was dealing with these massive hikes in their electricity rates. And it was because LA has a municipal utility. We have the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, which is not anyone's idea of a utopian solution to energy delivery. I mean, it's not a particularly accountable institution. It has some pretty ugly chapters in its own history. But that said, it is wildly more efficient and wildly more accountable than these big private utilities like PG&E.
Right.
And that's true around the country and around the state. That Sacramento did not lose power while most of its neighbors did this last month, because Sacramento has municipal power, and their rates stay lower than PG&E's does.
A city-owned system. Yeah. So I understand about half of the electricity generated in the United States is generated by investor-owned, by private for-profit corporations, and about half of it is generated by municipal-owned or state-owned or county-owned utilities, or even larger than that, regional utilities like the TVA. Correct me if I'm wrong on that stat, first of all, but secondly, for people who live in an area that is, where the utility is a for-profit utility, who would like to see that utility be taken over by the local government, or by the government, whatever government's appropriate. I mean, if it's a statewide utility, it would be the state government. If it's a citywide utility, it would be city government. What do people do, and what is happening in California right now to what's the word for deprivatize? It's not municipalized, because this is statewide.
To take it a public takeover. Yeah,
it's not nationalized. There's got to be a word for it. But anyhow, how do we do this?
In California, there's been some grassroots movement around Northern California. A group that I mentioned in the article has taken shape called Let's Own PG&E, which is pushing to take PG&E public. There've been some very prominent elected officials who've also been pushing for this. Ro Khanna, the Silicon Valley congressman, has come out in favor of taking PG&E public. So has the mayor of San Jose. So far, Gavin Newsom, the governor, has been a bit more disappointing on this, and at least as of a week and a half ago, was asking Berkshire Hathaway to make a bid on PG&E. PG&E is now in
other words, get more responsible stockholder ownership. Is that it?
Yeah, I mean that, and at least Warren Buffett, I suppose, gives money to Democrats, but but Berkshire Hathaway is makes a huge portion of its profits from fossil fuel extraction, from coal, from shale oil in the Permian Basin, and this is even our most benevolent fossil fuel executives are hardly looking out for our best interests.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate. And I get with Gavin Newsom as the governor, he's also whether it's legal or whether it's just kind of symbolic, he's basically the head of the Democratic Party in California. And there's probably a lot of Democrats who are funded in part by utilities, and that's a problem inside the Democratic Party, frankly. I saw Eric Garcetti over the weekend and spoke with him. I didn't bring this topic up though, and I looking back, I wish I had.
The mayor of LA.
But he's
Gavin
got his own
Newsom and
power
Eric-
company, so he's in Fat City, right?
Yeah, he's a little bit insulated from all of this, but both Gavin Newsom and Eric Garcetti have national political ambitions, and I think are more aligned with the more sort of careful centrist wing of the party that doesn't want people shouting the word socialist at them. Bernie Sanders, did. As part of his Green New Deal proposal, Sanders has called for taking all utilities public.